This is The Toss-Up, where an expert line panel dissects the hottest stories within the world of sports. From some of the nation's strongest college programs right here in Bloomington to the games and moments that capture the world's attention. It's all right here on The Toss-Up, and it starts right now. The Indiana baseball team had an eventful season last spring, full of ups and its fair share of downs. It ended abruptly before they could reach Omaha and saw coach Chris Lemonis leave for Mississippi State. But fear not, new head coach Jeff Mercer has turned heads coming from Wright State. Athletic director Fred Glass called the 33-year-old Hoosier the Brad Stevens of collegiate baseball. Some high praise from the man in charge. And with a slew of returning position players and a handful of freshman pitchers, the Indiana fall ball season has one game remaining before winter workouts come and go. Soon, it'll be college baseball season, and Indiana will be ready to hit the ground running. Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Dugan, and this is The Toss-Up. We're talking IU baseball, IU fall ball specifically. Joining me on the panel this week, we have Austin Matricardi, Jack Grossman, and Stefan Kreishnik. Guys, my first question to you, Stefan, I'll go to you first. Who is Jeff Mercer?
Well, I think it's very high praise to start off by calling him the Brad Stevens of baseball, but he is a young coach that knows a lot, and he had a really good resume coming out of Wright State, and then is someone that Fred Glass felt was the right fit. And I agree, too. From talking to some of the players in the offseason here, they all like him. They like the personality that he brings and the attitude that he brings to the team and to the program. So I think it's something to give a lot of excitement, a young face to IU baseball, and to what could be a good season coming forward.
Yeah, it was a really good, strong hire there from Fred Glass after Chris Lemonis leaving to take the Mississippi State job. Should be interesting to see how it works out. I think it's going to be good. He has a lot of talent coming back, which will help him. Brought on a few big names, none bigger than, of course, Scott Rowland, former Major League All-Star, World Series champion, to be the in charge of player development. So it should be really interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, he's a guy that has some Indiana ties. His dad actually coached right here in Bloomington. He lived in Bargersville. So he's got that Indiana tie, and he's also a really good coach. You know, he's a guy that values pitching and defense. So I think that Hoosier fans have a reason to be excited about Jeff Mercer.
Austin, right back to you. Expectations were high for this team last spring. As fall ball ends and we roll into winter workouts, what should expectations be for this team next season?
I think that expectations should still be high for this team. I think that there's a lot of talent here in Bloomington still, left over from last year's team, despite the fact that, IU has lost a couple guys. I think that this is a team that should be competing for a Big Ten title and should be trying to make a run in the postseason.
Yeah, Indiana still has a ton of talent. They still got Matt Gorski, Paulie Milto, Matt Lloyd, so on, so forth. So they have a lot of talent. The Big Ten schedule breaks favorably for them this year to where they had Minnesota at home, also Maryland at home, so two of the tougher teams they get in at Bar-Kaufman Field. So they have a really daunting non-conference slate, but Indiana has it set up to where they could have a lot of success here.
Yeah, if they can get some success in the non-conference play with how easy their Big Ten schedule may be, that could suit them well. And going into postseason play, they might be able to rest some of their pitchers and stuff like that. So I think expectations should be high. I think this is easily the best team in the Big Ten. And like you mentioned, Austin, despite losing a few players to the draft and whatnot, they still got a really loaded roster with a lot of good incoming freshmen and guys that may have redshirted last year that are going to be getting some playing time this year. So overall, when you look at the roster and what Jeff Mercer is being presented with, it's a pretty stacked team that could go pretty far this year.
It is a talented team, but what major holes are they looking to patch up, whether that be something they struggled with last year or replace a big departure?
Well, I think one thing that they struggled with at the beginning of the year was defense, particularly at shortstop with Jeremy Houston. And then we saw towards the end of the season, he kind of turned that around, and we saw his offense also improve. So I think if they can shore up their defense up the middle a little bit, that's big. And then, of course, losing Jonathan Stever to the MLB draft, I mean, that's your #1 starter, your Friday starter, your go-to ace in big situations. So it's going to take a lot of guys to fill that spot. Not one guy can replace Jonathan Stever, although Paulie Milto is pretty good. So I would say defense up the middle and then trying to find someone to fill that role for Jonathan Stever.
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, we know Paulie Milto is going to be the guy that gets the ball on Friday nights, going to be the #1 starter. But what happens after that? Because Indiana loses Stever, Milto has to move from that Saturday role to the Friday night starter role. Also have Tim Herron signing with the Cleveland Indians. He got drafted in day 3 of the draft. So what happens with the starting rotation is going to be the biggest question mark of the season for the Hoosiers, because after Paulie Milto, you really don't know what you're going to get.
I think that another big hole is out in right field, where a big guy, quite literally, Logan Sowers, moved on to the MLB. He's in the White Sox organization now. So I think that there's a couple of different candidates. The one that I like to play right there in right field is possibly Elijah Dunham. He had a big summer in the summer league, just playing around the country. I think that if he can take that next step, he played well as a freshman last year, but if he can take that next step, he could be a pretty big contributor for the Hoosiers this spring.
All right, guys. Well, before we continue, let's toss it to Meredith Struing at the media wall. Meredith?
The IU baseball team sliced their fall exhibition game right down the middle against Louisville last weekend, winning the first game 3-2, but falling to the Cardinals in the second game 2-5. Senior Paulie Milto started things right off on the right foot, throwing 2 scoreless innings with 2 strikeouts. Junior Camp Beecham came in to relieve Milto, and he added another pair of scoreless innings to the game. Junior Matt Gorski snatched the Hoosiers' first run after an RBI triple was hit by teammate Matt Lloyd. It looked like IU was going to shut out Louisville, but the Cardinals quickly sped their game up, taking the lead with 2 runs in the 5th. The Hoosiers weren't quick to throw in the towel, however, because Gorski scored the game winner with a late run in the 6th. Hoosiers won 3-2. And another win was in the forecast for IU in Game 2, but the Hoosiers couldn't quite match the Cardinals' explosive offense. The Cardinals finished with a 16-8 advantage in hits overall. The Hoosiers struggled against lefty pitcher Nick Bennett as he allowed just 1 hit in 3 scoreless innings, while the relief pitcher Kerry Wright added 4 strikeouts in 2 scoreless innings. Louisville won that game 5-2. The Hoosiers continue their exhibition game series when they take on the University of Southern Indiana this Saturday in Evansville, with the first pitch slated for 4 p.m. Michael, back to you.
Thanks, Meredith. All right, we're going to cut to break real quick, but coming up after the break, we're going to continue our discussion about IU baseball, and we'll do our lightning round, so stick with us. Welcome back to the Toss-Up. We're talking IU baseball. Before we continue, let's toss it to Matt Cohen at the media wall. Matt?
Despite losing ample talent to the Major League Baseball draft after the end of the 2018 season, the 2019 team will again be one of the best in the nation. The team's schedule can be broken down into 2 parts: a strong non-conference schedule followed by a weak schedule inside the Big Ten. The Hoosiers face a total of 8 teams that made the NCAA tournament last season: Northeastern, Coastal Carolina, UConn, Canisius, Kent State, Purdue, Minnesota, and Louisville. The season starts with a series against Memphis and a series against Tennessee, a 6-game stretch that the Hoosiers should not have a difficult time with. That precedes the first test of the year, a tournament at Coastal Carolina against 3 teams that made the tournament last year. Coastal Carolina hosted a regional last season, UConn finished 20th in the RPI, and Northeastern finished with an RPI of 39 in the 2018 season. IU will also have a tournament at Safeco Field in early March, though the other teams competing have not yet been announced. It is possible, however, that defending national champion Oregon State and College World Series participant Washington will be there in Seattle. IU has a series at home against Canisius before Big Ten play kicks off with the Iowa Hawkeyes coming to Bart Kaufman Field. The Hoosiers will also face the Maryland Terrapins in early Big Ten play, with a non-conference series against Kent State thrown in the middle. IU has a stretch against teams with sub-150 RPI rankings after facing Purdue and Bloomington, with Evansville, Ball State, and Michigan State before getting into a tough stretch to close the season. Michigan State and Penn State both figure to be bottom dwellers in the Big Ten, and both are on IU's schedule. A home game against Purdue, a road series against Michigan, and a home series against defending Big Ten champion Minnesota will be the biggest games for IU in the Big Ten this season. IU avoids Ohio State, which made the Big Ten tournament last year and gave IU serious trouble. Thrown in the midst of Big Ten play, IU will travel to Lexington to face a Kentucky team that was the biggest snub of the 2018 tournament, as well as Louisville, which finished 21st in RPI last season, will be coming to Bloomington. The Big Ten tournament begins on May 22nd in Omaha. All in all, IU has scheduled some of the better teams in the nation for its non-conference schedule, and it will potentially get stronger when the Safeco Field tournament teams are announced. This will balance a Big Ten schedule that isn't as strong as it has been in prior years. But it sets up Indiana to be among one of the higher seeds in the Big Ten tournament and in turn give IU a strong enough RPI to keep it in play to host a regional this spring, something the Hoosiers just missed out on last season. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Matt. All right, guys, we're going to play Make Your Case. Rules are pretty simple. I give you a statement. You make your case as to why that statement is true. Austin, we'll start with you. Make your case. Tell me why the IU pitching staff will be more productive than they were last season.
Well, I think that you have to look at the fact that there's a lot of younger guys that were on that pitching staff last year, and you have to look at the fact that maybe they've gotten some more experience, especially in high-pressure situations, and they've taken a step forward, and they'll be more productive. So you might be losing a John Stever, you might be losing a Tim Herron, but maybe your guys like Tommy Summer, Cal Kruger, maybe some of those younger guys are taking a step forward this year.
Yeah, Cam Beecham is another one that could step up, but for me, it all starts with Paulie Milto. He had a really good year last year, and you could tell the difference when he was hurt midway through the Big Ten season. That's when Indiana went through its toughest stretch of the season and unfortunately lost their chance to host a regional last season. But if he can stay healthy, I think he can have an even better year this year than John Stever had last year. I think he's that good and he's that important to this baseball team. And if he's able to set the tone on Friday nights, that just helps everything going forward every weekend.
Yeah, and that's a good point. If Paulie Milto had been healthy last year, it could have been a whole lot different thing there towards the middle of Big Ten play, especially that Ohio State series.
Yeah,
so
Indiana was a top 10 team at that point.
Yeah. So if Paulie Milto was healthy, the whole turn of things could have been different. And I think going off of even what Austin said earlier, when you got guys like Andrew Saalfrank, even Connor Manis, Tommy Summer, young guys that got a lot of good experience last year, they're just going to build off of that and be even better this year, in my opinion. So I think the pitching staff has good potential if they build off of that experience. And then you got guys that were injured last year, like Matt Petrosino or Matt Ludwicki, the freshman that redshirted last year. So these are guys that can come in, and if they get the right amount of experience, they can build off of that and have success down the road.
And on this same topic, you have to look at the change in the coaching staff, too. Kyle Bunn might be gone, but Justin Parker, the new pitching coach, was at UCF last year, and they had one of the better pitching staffs in the country, too. So it's quite possible that maybe some of these guys under a new coaching staff will be able to, take a step forward with a new philosophy.
And even building off of that, if you want to look past just the starting rotation, I mean, in the back end, we saw Matt Lloyd. He's a two-way player, but we didn't see him pitch that much at the beginning of the season. That might have been to preserve his arm for when we saw a lot of him at the end of the season. I mean, he proved that he's a really quality arm coming out of the back end of that bullpen, along with Cal Kruger. So when you look at the pitching system as a whole, from the starters to the relievers, they're pretty strong. Yeah,
Cal Kruger is going to be a big piece. It'll be interesting how Mercer uses Cal Kruger to see if he keeps using him as the Andrew Miller type pitcher, or I guess a Josh Hader type, as Lamonis did last year. I thought maybe he was overused a little bit as he seemed to wear down as the season went on. How Mercer manages Cal Kruger's arm throughout the entire season, assuming that he stays in the bullpen, will be a huge storyline for Indiana.
And what's going to be interesting with Cal Kruger is that I think that a big thing that impacts him is Matt Lloyd, actually, because if Lloyd is going to be a DH and he's going to pitch more often, then that takes some of that burden off of Cal Kruger from being that closer role kind of guy. If Lloyd is available more out of the bullpen, then I think that eases the burden on Cal Kruger, but it's the same way, if he's out in the field like he was last season, then that makes things a little bit harder for Kruger.
Now let's look at the flip side of this question. Austin, we'll go right back to you. What will happen if this pitching staff is indeed less productive than it was last year? What would go wrong? What could go wrong that you can foresee right now?
Well, something that went wrong last season, Paulie Milto got hurt. I think that everything begins and ends with Paulie Milto on this pitching staff. He is the workhorse. He's the rock. I think that he's a guy that could be your Big Ten pitcher of the year. So I think that if Paulie Milto falters in any way, it could be disastrous for IU.
Yeah, and just beyond that, you have a lot of new guys that are in a lot of new roles this year because of Stever and Herron being gone. You have to replace 2 new starters in every single weekend for the Hoosiers. That's not an easy thing to do in college baseball, especially with the early non-conference schedule that Indiana's playing in. So if they can't figure out who's going to be their Saturday and Sunday starters. That hurts the bullpen depth because you're having to use a lot of guys a lot of days, and that hurts just trying to figure out who's going to take the ball on what day.
And we saw last year when Milto, went out, or even when Milto was in, Friday you had Stever, Saturday you had Milto, but then Sunday and then the midweek games just kind of seem to be starter by committee. Every week it seemed to change. I mean, you have Beecham come in, maybe get 2 straight weeks where he would start, and then you had Heron towards the end of the season, you had Summer at some point. I mean, we saw that doesn't always work. You kind of want to have someone set in place so going into that week, he knows what to prepare for, and the team knows what to expect coming out on Sunday. And now without Stever, now you have that pitcher by committee type thing on Saturday and Sunday. So it could be a tough situation. It's going to take a lot of focus in the non-conference play to see who wants to step up and take those roles and kind of be the rocks over the weekend for IU.
Now, overall, pitching staff, defense, at the plate, everything, why should people be excited about this team?
Well, I think back off of what we talked earlier, I mean, this team is still stacked, even with losing 4 guys to the draft. I mean, there's a lot of talent on this team, and a lot of great athletes on this team. I mean, Matt Gorski, you saw the numbers he put up, but I mean, he had an inside the Parker against Purdue, and he's really aggressive on the base pass. So the IU has, and with Justin Walker and Jeremy Houston on the base pass, these are really athletic guys that can cause havoc to a lot of defenses and to opposing pitching staffs.
Just the core group of Lloyd, Logan Kalitha, Gorski, and Ryan Feynman. That's a great, solid core you bring back from last year. Ryan Feynman has always been one of the top defensive catchers in the Big Ten. Last year he backed it up with the bat, had a really strong season behind the plate for the most part. So if he could keep that going, Logan Kalitha's a very lethal leadoff man. You have a lot of pieces to work with offensively to where you could really, even with losing a Logan Sowers and a Luke Miller, still be able to be one of the better offensive teams, not just in the Big Ten, but in the nation.
I think that a big point is that you have to look at that outfield. You have to look at Gorski and Kalitha, 2 of the most dynamic athletes in the Big Ten. They can hit, they can run, they can field. Everything. These guys have got it. They've got all the tools. They play really well. They could be 2 of the best in the Big Ten, but at the same time, you have to look that there's a new coaching staff, and I think that when there's a new coach, there's a little more excitement just because you want to see what the team is going to look like underneath him. So I think that that's another big point for the Hoosiers and why Hoosier fans should be excited.
And you brought up the pitching staff earlier, that it's so young after Paulie Milto. Having a veteran presence such as Ryan Feynman, who's so good in the backstop, so good defensively, to just manage that pitching staff in a Yadier Molina-esque type way is just going to help the pitching staff try to get along, especially early in the season.
And even going off of that, I mean, we talk about the guys that the team lost to the draft, but I mean, how big was it that the team was able to keep Feynman and Matt Lloyd and Logan Kalitha and Matt Gorski? Because these are big pieces that IU's going to have this year that could help the team definitely make a run into postseason and beyond.
All right, it's that time of the show. You guys know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round. There's one rule. Your answers have to be 10 seconds or less. Austin, breakout player this year, who?
I think it's Elijah Dunham. He had a big year in the summer league. He's a first baseman by trade, but he played the outfield a little bit more. I think he's going to slide into right field and be a breakout player.
Going off the board a little bit, how about Lane Miller? Had a sub-2 ERA in 6 starts with Terre Haute in the prospect lead. Look for him maybe after a redshirt season.
Yeah, I'm going to say Justin Walker. I mean, I know he got a decent amount of playing time last year, but now kind of going in without Luke Miller there, I think he's going to get a lot more playing time this year, a lot more consistent playing time. I think that's going to help him.
The most valuable Hoosier on this team is going to be?
I'm going to say Matt Lloyd. I know we didn't see him pitch as much at the beginning of last season, but nonetheless, at the end of the season, we saw that he could be really lethal out of the back end of the bullpen. So I think him, if he can produce on offensive side and defensive side, is going to be the MVP for the team.
Matt Gorski, someone's going to have to pick up the slack after losing Miller and Sowers. He's a 5-tool player, might be one of the best players in the Big Ten.
MVP, you don't really see a guy that doesn't play in every single game, but I'm going to go back to Paulie Milto. I think that he's huge. He's the biggest part of this team, I think.
Now, before we get to the spring season, we have to finish up fall ball. We have to get through the winter workouts. What is the goal of the fall and winter season for this team? What needs to happen more than anything else for them to take the next step, Austin?
Well, if you want some coach speak, they just want to develop. They want to get better. The new coaching staff wants to integrate with the players and get familiar. They want to install new systems, and I think that from what we've seen, they're doing all of that.
Yeah, you want to see the young guys move along, develop, and really try to figure out, take the first steps to seeing, most importantly, who's going to be the Saturday starter and who's going to be the Sunday starter.
Yeah, and you want to fix the small mechanics, like we had mentioned earlier, defense, turning double plays, getting routine ground balls. These are things that are going to be big in the regular season. And you want to, those little kinks that you want to work out and before the season starts is key here in fall ball.
All right, well, as we near the end of the show, it's time for last word. You get one word and one word only. Mr. Grossman, I'm looking at you. Austin, we'll start with you for this one. What is your last word on IU fall ball?
Exciting.
New.
Potential.
Okay, those are pretty exciting words right there. All right, well, that does it for the show this week. Be sure to continue the discussion on our Twitter page at IUSTV Sports and on Facebook at IUSTV Sports. You can always give any suggestions for the show and ask any questions you may have. Toss it up. Find out if we'll catch it. We'll see you next time.